Hello everyone, and welcome to my top 5 list of the best units in the Vampire Coast roster. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at those units that really shine in both multiplayer as well as campaign. So without further ado, let's jump right into this video and have some fun. And coming in with the number 5 spot here on the list, we do have the Deathstreak Terrorgeist. Now this guy is pretty similar to his Vampire Count cousin, however he does not have a bonus versus large. Overall, his weapon strength is a little bit better at 460, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the standard Terrorgeist for the Vampire Counts does have 430 with a bonus versus large, so essentially what that means is this guy's going to be a little bit more well-rounded. He won't be as much of a specialist versus large units. Granted, he still performs very well versus large targets, but he's going to be a little bit better against things on the ground like Grave Guard and Armored Infantry, and he's definitely a very powerful addition to the Vampire Coast roster. What really makes him shine is, number one, you can put him with Luther Harkin in the skies, a couple deck droppers, and Fellbats, and he is such a powerhouse at helping the Vampire Coast secure the skies. And once you secure the skies, it really opens up the way for deck droppers with the handguns to just tear apart your enemy's formation. On top of that, just like the Vampire Count variant, he does of course have a couple breath attacks, he has regeneration, causes terror, and it's just a powerhouse of a unit, definitely very solid. But one of the reasons why I think he's really powerful on the Vampire Coast roster is he helps you dominate the skies, and when you dominate the skies with the Vampire Coast, that opens up one of the best units on the roster, the deck droppers with handguns, to just have a field day on pretty much any target they want. So here with the number 5 pick, we do have the Deathstreak Terrorgeist, a very nice supporting unit to our glorious favorite leader of the Vampire Coast, Luther Harkin, and also a very dominant force in the sky. So here is the number 5 pick, and guys, let's head on over to number 4. And coming in with the number 4 spot here on the list, we do have the Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mobs with handguns. These guys are an absolute powerhouse of a unit in both campaign as well as multiplayer. In my Luther Harkin campaign, I pretty much focused my entire army around them in both the early and late game. They're able to mow down pretty much any AI army. I don't care if you have shields, monsters, your own ranged units. These guys were just the destroyer of worlds. In my campaign, I think by the end, they had like 190 range or something with all the upgrades the Vampire Coast has. They had like 30 missile damage. They don't break when they're taking a lot of fire. These guys are just beasts. Now, as far as multiplayer goes, they're good in a multitude of different matchups. Now, the one time you have to be careful with them is against Elvish factions. So if you're facing off against Wood Elves or High Elves, Lothran Seaguard, Deepwood Scouts are really good at countering these Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mobs because their 145 range and low armor is going to make them very vulnerable against enemy archers. But of course, you can remedy that by getting Scurvy Dogs and Fellbats and having mortars and maybe even old Queen Bess harassing the enemy archer line. But regardless, these guys are so good. Firstly, they don't break, which is one of the bigger issues with powder units in general. So if you have handgunners for the Empire, the Dwarvish ones are pretty resilient. They have really high leadership and armor, so they don't break as easily. But let's compare them to the Empire or Greenskin missile units or just, missile units from most of the other factions. These guys are going to stand and deliver till the bitter end, which is so nice. Yes, they're going to crumble. You might lose them completely, but if you put them in guard mode and put them on a high priority target, even if they're being attacked by Scurvy Dogs or Dire Wolves or Chaos Poison Warhounds from behind, they're going to keep shooting that high value target until the bitter end. And just, it's so nice to have something that's reliable like that, isn't going to break and run off and, just get, because for example, if the silver bullets break and they get chased out of your main pocket or formation, they're going to break quick, they're going to get chased away, and when they're in the open, they're going to get feasted upon. Whereas these guys, even if they take a massive alpha strike and go down to 40%, they're not going to run. So that gives you time to get reinforcing troops nearby. So maybe some deckhand mobs or your own Scurvy Dogs or Depth Guard to come in and save them. And then they can return to firing. They're not going to be isolated out in the open, getting chewed upon by enemy doggos and things like that. And they just do some serious work. They also have a really good volume of fire with 120 models. Their missile damage isn't insane, but again, it's more of a volume of fire thing. It's consistency, and it really is kind of a thematic and I would say the capstone of the Vampire Coast playstyle, that long grindy game where you can just focus them down with your powder, have a good old time. So I think these guys are great in so many different matchups. You can literally have so many armies with just these guys, like a couple of them mixed in with some halberds. You're going to have your armor piercing. I mean, they can take out monsters. They can take enemy missile fire. It's just such a good unit. So again, I think Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mobs definitely deserve a spot here in the list. They're one of the heart and soul units of the Vampire Coast roster and probably the best of all the Gunnery Mob groups. The pistol variant's pretty good because it can shoot while moving. But again, these guys have a lot of stopping power and definitely are a big threat to pretty much anything your opponent brings, except archers that can outrange them, of course. But match specific, don't bring them so much against like Wood Elves and High Elves. You're obviously going to need to change up your strategy. But against factions like, like that have a lot of armor, I mean, in general, they're going to be really, really good. So the Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mobs are going to be number 4 here on the list, and now it is time for number 3. And coming in at the number 3 spot here on the list, we do have the Zombie Pirate Deckhand Mobs with polearms. These guys are basically like the Old Yeller or Old Faithful or pretty much any cultural analogy you can think of, something that's steady and dependable, and they're always there for you. That's going to be the Zombie Pirate Deckhand Mobs with polearms. Let's go ahead and get into the nitty gritty of why these guys are so good. So for 400 gold, you were getting such a steal. I personally think they're probably one of the most cost-effective units on the Vampire Coast roster, as well as in the game. So firstly, 400 gold, you're going to be getting 27 weapon strength, which is really good for the cost. And on top of that, they have 19 armor piercing damage and a bonus first large of 13, which is incredibly high. So that's going to allow them to trade upwards so efficiently. For example, you could have these guys in the back line. You could be facing off against the Warriors of Chaos, who have a group of Chaos Knights, which cost, 14 or 1500, depending on which variant you get. They're going to be charging in with a full chub, and these guys are going to be waiting for them. And for 400 gold, you have charged defense, you have anti-large, you have massive armor-piercing values for the cost, and of course, the bonus first large is going to allow them to trade upward and actually do some decent damage against Chaos Knights and tar pit them for days. So these guys are just such a good unit. So you use them in the back line to defend all your guns, your gunnery mobs, your cannons, your mortars, maybe even Queen Bess back there. These guys are not going to buckle and run. And that's also something else that is so good. Sometimes when you're defending a cannon, let's say Hammer of the Witches with some spearmen, they can simply get swarmed, right? So there could be like a hounds coming in, enemy leadership, enemy heavy cav. And even though they're going to be good versus those units, they're going to eventually run, right? Just because of the pressure. But these guys, no matter how badly you beat them down and how many units you swarm them with, they're going to stand and defend to the bitter end, which I think is one of the reasons why they're very good, just like the gunnery mobs we talked about before. They fight to the bitter end. And on top of that, one last thing I'd like to articulate, they're actually not a bad frontline troop. So yes, oftentimes you see halberds and polearms and spears being used to defend your flanks, but if you want to throw these guys in the front line versus any faction with armor, like the Dwarves or Chaos, even against the Empire, maybe they're going to mix in some great swords. Probably not in this matchup, but any faction that you're going to be expecting an armored front line from, these guys are going to be able to do really well. By zombie standards and for their cost, I suppose, on the Vampire Coast roster, they do have okay melee defense. It's not really their strong point here, but they do have really good armor piercing value. So against Warriors of Chaos, yes, their melee attack's very low. They're probably not going to be able to just cut through them, but at least they bring some AP to the table, whereas the standard zombie pirate deckhand mobs do not. So these guys bring a little bit more armor piercing. They're great against large targets. They can defend a point all day. They're just going to stand firm with their charge defense versus large, their anti-large, and their armor piercing. So I think that these guys, they're so solid. I've seen so many builds that just run like a ton of these guys, and they are just so tough to crack and get through. Yes, a unit like Blackheart Corsairs or like Witch Elves or Sisters of Slaughter, a really high DPS unit can burn through them relatively quickly. But again, you also have to remember they cost like 1/3 the cost or half the cost of a lot of those units I just articulated there. So Zombie Pirate Deckhand mobs, these guys are the old Yeller of the Vampire Coast roster, and that is why they're going to be claiming the number 3 spot. I almost gave them number 2, but the number 2 spot holds a spot very, very dear in my heart. So without further ado, let's jump over to number 2. And coming in with the number 2 spot here on the list, we do have the Necrofex Colossus. This guy's an absolute beast in both campaign as well as multiplayer. Let's go ahead and talk about campaign. So in campaign, this guy's your endgame unit. You do have other options, and you can go with the Prometheans, you can go with the Rotting Leviathan, and go with a bit of more of a monstrous army using Morngulls and the animated Hulks. But in reality, I feel like where the Vampire Coast really shines in the late game, especially in campaign, is going to be powder. You're going to have your gunnery mobs, you're going to have your Colossus just bombarding everything that comes your way. And if they have to, they can also fight pretty well in melee. They're not complete pushovers. Now, their melee prowess is definitely one of their weaknesses, but in campaign, you're going to be having extra powder, you're going to have a gunnery wipe most likely, you're going to have tons of supporting elements and chaff to really protect these guys. So in campaign, I definitely think they're one of the more optimal late game units. You just get a bunch of the guns, you get these guys in the back line, a couple depth guard up in the front line, and you can definitely butter the bread of most AI armies, and this thing is just a monster in campaign. And also the same thing applies to multiplayer. In multiplayer, this guy's extremely powerful. He's good in so many different matchups. One of the only real weaknesses he has, I would say he actually has 2. So cannon fire, direct cannon fire, so Eagle Claw bolt throwers, cannons, great cannons, just anything that can do that direct, heavy armor piercing, anti-large damage can definitely drag him down, but the Vampire Coast does have a lot of tools, much like the Vampire Counts, for disrupting enemy artillery. So you can go double Colossus, you can get 2 or 3 Fellbats, you can get some deck droppers, some Scurvy Dogs, you can disrupt your opponent's missile line or their artillery batteries, and these guys are going to march pretty much free, and at that point these guys are just so damn tough to deal with. So firstly, 45 speed. They're going to be able to outrun pretty much any, spear infantry, right? With the exception of maybe Azrai Spears might be able to pressure them, but, Dread Spears and things like that, they're not really going to be able to catch this guy. He has 45 speed. His peg leg can definitely do some serious work. He can waddle quite fast. But on top of that, he can shoot while he's moving. So the entire time that you're moving and repositioning, he's going to be generating value, just blasting things to pieces. He has heavy armor piercing, so he can take down big armored constructs. I actually had a game the other day where I was facing off against the Tomb Kings. In this bad boy, I actually had Count Noctilus on top of Necrofex Colossus, as well as one Colossus. And I was able to just annihilate a Tomb Scorpion in a matter of seconds with their dual focus fire. And it is just huge damage output. They can, essentially most of these like type of battery units, right? So if you have, let's say, a Bone Giant from the Tomb Kings, he's going to have to like set up, get that big winding shot. And the whole time your opponent's going to be seizing the initiative, compromising him and getting closer and closer. But this guy you can shoot and you're like, oh, I want to move over here and reposition and maybe summon some units to cover my retreat with Count Noctilus, for example. And you can do that. And they're just so damn powerful. 75 armor definitely isn't bad. So light archers, like regular archers or non-armor piercing missiles, are really going to struggle to deal with this guy, right? The armor is going to be very useful. On top of that, any whittling damage they can do. So there is that kind of that school of thought, right? That you can use goblin archers and low tier archers to wear down a big target. Well, it is much harder against Vampire Coast because he does actually have access to Invocation of the Hex. So you can be healing these things up with Noctilus or a Vampire Fleet Admiral or a Captain. And it is just so tough to deal with them because they can move away from melee threats. They can shoot things while they're running. It does have to be in front of them, but still, you can usually angle it to the point where they're running somewhere and still shooting at something. And the other weakness I was going to articulate is that when they run out of ammo, they're not the best in melee. They only have 30 melee defense. They're a little bit inaccurate when they're fighting ground targets. I mean, against like blobs of infantry, it doesn't matter. But if they're fighting an enemy lord or hero or like a paladin or something, it's going to be a little bit tough for them to make perpetual contact. But that's where you have something like a Gunnery Wight. Now, if you strip down a Gunnery Wight down to 700 gold, hide them in the trees, and you just have like 2 marching Colossus just going around and gunning everything down, they can literally just treat it like a NASCAR racing track. And on the way back, they can refuel. The Gunnery Wight can scurry out of the trees and give them extra ammunition, which is insane value, considering, your opponent's going to be like, oh, it's almost out of ammo. Maybe I can finally kill it. It's like, nope, now back up to 25, 40% ammo. It is so crazy. So the Colossus, a monster of a unit. He has 330 range, so he can outrange Ushabti great bows and, things in that same kind of a caliber of fire. And, he can take down enemy constructs. He's pretty decent against enemy artillery even. Not the most accurate, but you do, of course, have Invocation of the Heck and your own Carronades to kind of open that up. So if you're worried about your Colossus going down, just bring Scurvy Dogs and Fellbats, or spam your own Carronades and snipe out their artillery pieces with just multiple cannons and the Colossus shooting them. I mean, this unit is the destroyer. It kills armored infantry, it kills enemy missile units because it can outrange them, and when they get close, he can simply fall back and keep shooting while he's doing that. These units are insane. Now, I was really torn as to whether to put these guys as 2 or 3 because these zombie deckhand mobs with polearms are extremely cost efficient and probably more useful in every single matchup. The Colossus does have some matchups in which you probably want to avoid it, but even in matchups in which the Colossus is bad, it can be made to work because you can bring other things to compensate for its weaknesses. And it is such a powerhouse unit. Sometimes, like, I've had games facing off against these guys and I'm just like, oh, I just can't deal with it. It is like, because typically if you're going against Vampire Coast, you're going to be respecting their powder, right? You're going to be respecting their handguns and their deckhand mobs. So you're going to bring a ton of infantry to deal with those type of threats. But if you do that, then something like a wild Colossus appears out of nowhere, and it is just so tough to deal with. So these guys are just monsters. He keeps having that animation. If you guys have been watching, like, he keeps like stepping forward into my screen, which trips me out. The first couple times I was like trying to do these runs and talk about why he was good, he kept like surprising me, and I thought something was wrong with the game with his idle animation here. But yeah. So the Necrofex Colossus, my favorite unit on the roster, I think I have to say. It goes between this guy and the handgun gunnery mobs, but he's just so cool. I mean, in terms of design, application, he's a monster in campaign, multiplayer. He is the destroyer of worlds. So number 2 here, we do have the Necrofex Colossus. And now, guys, it is time to reveal our grand champion, our number 1 pick. And after all of the kind of, talking about how awesome the Colossus is, it's probably hard to imagine anything is better. And the number 1 pick, I think, a lot of you guys will probably see this coming. Now, it's not as good in campaign as maybe the Colossus is, but in multiplayer, it is such an oppressive unit that I think it has to deserve the number 1 spot. So we're going to be jumping over to the number 1 pick here on our list. Get things rolling. And coming in with that good and tasty number 1 pick, we do have the Deck Droppers with handguns. I should probably articulate before we move forward that these guys are a much better pick in multiplayer than they are in campaign. In campaign, they're definitely pretty good, but you don't need that kind of backline harass and that battlefield control quite as much because the AI usually just charges at you. There's not going to be really dynamic flanking or too much pressure you're going to be having to deal with. So they're not going to be quite as useful, and oftentimes it's just better in campaign to fill up your army with just regular handguns or maybe another Colossus or perhaps some Prometheans or something that's really going to kind of generate value for sure. However, in multiplayer, I feel that these guys are so good in multiplayer that they really warranted the number 1 spot here on the list because they really address one of the main weaknesses of the Vampire Coast. So if you look at the coast, everything is very slow. Even their faster units have like 45 or 50 speed tops aside from the Scurvy Dogs and the Fellbats. But these guys not only give you massive battlefield control like Fellbats, but they also have 130 range and they hit like absolute trucks. These guys can take apart enemy lords, flying monsters, just high value targets so easily. And if you don't respect the deck droppers with handguns, man, you're going to have a bad day. Pretty much every faction that's facing off against the Vampire Coast, you're going to need to bring, if you can, of course, you're going to need to bring some like Harpies or your own Fellbats or anything up in the skies like Carrion for the Tomb Kings, for example, who can counteract them. Because if you don't, they're just going to sit on your Lord. They're going to sit on your armored targets. They're going to be able to go after, pretty much anything that you love and hold dear, right? However, something else to kind of mention about these guys is not only are they powerful missile units, you can see they have 130 range and 41 missile damage with really good armor piercing values, but they're also basically Fellbats at their very core, right? Yes, they have a lower model count, but they can serve that same purpose. You could be shooting up a high value target, doing as much damage as you possibly can. You might kill that target, and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I'm out of ammo on these guys. Suddenly you get a group of, flying harass tools. You can go shut down artillery pieces. You can go after handgunners. They can definitely cause quite a bit of disruption. So I definitely think they're just such a powerful unit. They hit like trucks. They really give the Vampire Coast battlefield control that they normally lack with their very slow roster. They can take out high value targets, and worst case scenario, you can use them to rear charge things to break leadership. Of low leadership units like Skaven, they can chase down Skaven slingers and slaves and things like that all day. And they also have enough mass to kind of disrupt artillery pieces and knock them off their crew. So if you really need to shut down, the Hammer of the Witches or, something like that, you can use them for that. You can go after Shopti Great Bows to buy more time for your Colossus to kind of advance and take them apart. The deck droppers with handguns just bring so much utility, direct damage, and battlefield control that I think they warrant the #1 spot here in the list. So this is it. These are the grand champions for now. And again, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think that the list should have been in a different order? Is there units you think belong on the list? And admittedly, I think it's quite a bit harder to make a best of list. The worst list is easy. You just look at the really just horrible units that are never good, right? Like the Bloated Corpse and, Bloated Corpse sometimes, but the animated Hulks and, all that kind of stuff, and, the bombers. And it's like, okay, they definitely, deserve to be here. However, when you're talking about better units, there are circumstances in which, depending on the matchup, Depth Guard, for example, the standard Depth Guard might belong in here. Sirens can be quite good in different matchups. So the best of list is a little bit more circumstantial, I guess you could say. But I definitely think that the ones that we did talk about on this list were, just good in just many different matchups. And that kind of is the reason they deserve to be here. So again, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd really like to see what you guys think. I'll do my best to respond to as many comments as possible. But again, with my crippling wrist issues and wrist tendonitis and all that fun stuff, it does take me some time. But again, guys, I want to thank you so much for your support here on the channel. It's been an absolute blast. And let me know if you guys would like me to cover another faction. If you want me to do a best of list for the Tomb Kings or the vampire counts or things like that, or a worst. I think the worst lists are more fun to do because it's kind of funny to joke about them, but let me know, guys. I'd certainly be interested. So thanks again for watching, guys. Have an excellent night and take care.